So Jeremy Clarkson wrote a column which, even by the standards, with the possible one that dreadful Hopkins woman wrote for The Sun a few years ago, it was more shocking to me as a former Fleet Street tabloid journalist, albeit not on a right-wing newspaper. As a former Fleet Street tabloid journalist, I could not believe my eyes when Jeremy Clarkson wrote doubly of his desire to see Meghan Markle paraded naked through the streets of every town in Britain while the crowds chanted shame and threw lumps of excrement at her. But in terms of base misogyny, I found it even more remarkable that he talked about hating her even more than he hated Nicola Sturgeon, whose only offence seems to me, from Jeremy Clarkson's point of view, the fact that she's a woman, or possibly the fact that he's Scottish and independent and strong-minded. And, of course, Rose West, a serial killer. I hate her more than Rose West. And he got into trouble. He didn't do much for a while. I'll read you his account of the aftermath of the publication of this story shortly. The month that has passed since it was published makes the decision to release a statement publicly yesterday. The first one was just, oh dearie me, I've accidentally done a sexism. Please. And it was pathetic, the original apology. We said so at the time, and we shall say so again now. Dearie me, I've done a sexism. In fact, it ties in with the conversation we were having in the first hour of this morning about a toxic culture of misogyny, about the kind of comments that female police officers routinely encounter at work. That idea that it's absolutely fine to talk about women like this, nothing wrong with it at all. And if you don't like it, if you don't go along with it, then you're frigid, is probably a word that's often used. Or you're just a killjoy, you're just this, you're just that, you're just the other. Precisely the kind of approach that defenders of Jeremy Clarkson would adopt if they were trying to explain why Meghan Markle shouldn't be disgusted, outraged, upset, devastated at being publicly, very publicly, adjudged to be less appealing than a serial killer. But they didn't see it coming. That's what I partly find fascinating about this story. As quite a close observer of matters media, they didn't see it coming, and I know why. Actually, rein in the ego a bit, son. I think I know why. And I'll tell you. I think it's because they all bets are off with Meghan Markle. For reasons that Harry touches upon in quite a lot of detail in his new book, all of the rules, and there aren't many rules, there really aren't many rules when it comes to what columnists can and can't write, but there are a few. At least there usually are a few. I think that somehow the sort of collective hysteria that the British media has indulged in with regard to this woman, and to a lesser extent her husband, the collective hysteria has seen a complete abandonment of even the, I nearly used a phrase very popular in Private Eye magazine there, which I'm not allowed to say on the radio, the so-called standards in British tabloid journalism that are little better than a fig leaf do actually exist. There are lines you cannot cross when writing about public figures who have done nothing wrong, public figures who have committed no crime, public figures who are responsible for no offence and who have hurt nobody. There are lines that you can't cross. But they lifted those lines for Meghan Markle because this story is not just about Jeremy Clarkson. It's also about everyone who read his column and decided that there was absolutely no problem whatsoever with putting it in the newspaper. I don't know how many people would be involved in that editorial chain, but there would be some. And then, of course, you have the added horror of the political editor of the BBC having the editor of The Sun on the television on the Sunday morning following the publication of this article, while the entire country was in uproar, and she failed utterly. She's not the political editor anymore. Laura Koonsberg, she's got her own show now on Sunday mornings, completely failing to ask the editor of The Sun a single sniff of a question about this absolutely incredible story that is still rumbling a month later. But that's between her and her employers, I suppose. But that's how it happened. In that even, I mean, I'm trying to think of a way of explaining this from your line of work rather than mine. But, here you go. So we'll do it the other way round, right? So imagine that the boss's daughter works with you. And she doesn't have to obey any of the rules that everybody else has to obey. She gets away with murder on a daily basis. But it turns out there is actually one thing she can do that will actually result in disciplinary action. It's like the opposite of that. Meghan Markle, you can say what you want. You can write what you want. You can print whatever vicious, bilious nonsense you please, because it's her. You know, absolute stuffer. I mean, it's write what you want, lads. Anything at all. In fact, the women can go further because then they've got even more of a fig leaf. Sarah, fill your boots. Alison, seriously, do your worst. Anything you've got, pull them all out. Go, all stops removed. I know you've been pretty vile about various other people over the years, but on this one, with this woman, I want you to rewrite the rule book. I want you to launch the abuse of this woman into the stratosphere. Incredibly, for someone as old and experienced as him, Jeremy Clarkson managed to go too far. But the reason why it happened is because all modes of self-censorship or common decency or basic expectations of something remotely resembling decency is the word I'm running with, they've been suspended. That's how it happened, all right? And not just suspended for him, who wrote it, but for everyone who read it on its way from his fevered imagination onto the pages of Rupert Murdoch's Sun newspaper. And then they did what they always do. They just hoped it would all go away. And it didn't, because lines had been crossed and because some members of the British public retain a capacity for disgust, despite years of gaslighting and grooming by Rupert Murdoch and his friends in the media. So it wasn't so much writing about a naked Meghan being pelted with excrement. It was the Rose West comparison that stuck most in my craw. Anyway, you know the chronology. The Sun apologised a few days later for the December article, removed it from its website, apparently at his urging. Emily Clarkson, who is the daughter of Jeremy Clarkson, made clear her disgust at what her father had done and indeed the role it plays in the broader picture of misogyny. And he issued the following apology, which is, I mean, for a man who's supposed to be fearless, for a man who's supposed to be, you know, a man who prides himself on, I'll tell you what. So it's just pathetic. It's like a mewling schoolboy. Oh dear, he wrote, I've rather put my foot in it. In a column I wrote about Meghan, I made a clumsy reference to a scene in Game of Thrones, and this has gone down badly with a great many people. I'm horrified to have caused so much hurt, and I shall be more careful in future. And then he laughed all the way to the pub. Except, of course, he hasn't apologised to Meghan Markle and he hasn't referenced Rose West. So if the story's still bubbling away a month later and he's apparently facing the end of employment with an organisation like Amazon, he's obviously decided, completely coincidentally, that he needs to return to the fray and offer up a more fulsome apology, which reads as follows. One of the strange things I've noticed in recent times is that whenever an MP or a well-known person is asked to apologise for something, no matter how heartfelt or profound that apology may be, it's never enough for the people who called for it in the first place. Poor me, poor me, poor me, poor me, a drink. So I'm going to try and buck the trend this morning with an apology for the things I said in a Sun column recently about Meghan Markle. I really am sorry. All the way from the balls of my feet to the follicles on my head, this is me putting my hands up. It's a mea culpa with bells on. Usually I read what I've written to someone else before filing, but I was home alone on that fateful day and in a hurry. So when I'd finished, I just pressed send, and then when the column appeared the next day, the landmine exploded. It was a slow rumble to start with, and I ignored it. But remember, this is an absolutely deep and sincere apology. But then the rumble got louder, so I picked up a copy of The Sun to see what all the fuss was about. This is weird. We've all been there, I guess. In that precise moment when we suddenly realise we've completely messed up, you're sweaty and cold at the same time and your head pounds and you feel sick. This is how he now describes what he described at the time as having rather put his foot in it. I mean, there's a world of difference between, oh dear, I've rather put my foot in it, and you are sweaty and cold at the same time and your head pounds and you feel sick. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Oh, I've got something in common. Had I really said that? It was horrible. I knew what had happened straight away. I'd been thinking of a scene in Game of Thrones, but I'd forgotten to mention this, so it looked like I was actually calling for revolting violence to rain down on Meghan's head. I was very angry with myself, because in all those controversial days on Top Gear, when I was accused of all sorts of things, it was very rarely sexism. Yeah. That's right, because you compared her to two men, didn't you, when you talked about hating her on a cellular level? You said, I hate her more than Fred West and Rishi. Oh, no, you didn't, mate. You chose women. but you're definitely not a misogynist. We never did women can't park gags, for instance. Is it too late to get him canonised? They never did women can't park gags on Top Gear. Is it too late to put him up for sainthood, do you think? Is it? Or suggested that powerful cars were only for men. Yeah, here's a big shock here. Television presenters trying not to alienate potentially half of their audience. I'll give the man a medal. And I was thrilled when Jodie Kidd and Ellen MacArthur set fastest ever laps in our reasonably priced car. Pardon? What? You compared her to a serial killer and said you preferred the serial killer, and you think the fact that Jodie Kidd drove a car quickly round a track on your old television programme somehow exonerates you from the allegation of misogyny? Mate, I think you should have read this to somebody before you sent it. Never mind the actual article. But he's not finished. He says, I'm just not sexist. Which is, of course, what all sexists say. And I abhor violence against women. And yet I seemed to be advocating just that. No, pal, you were not advocating just that. You weren't seeming to advocate just that. You were advocating just that. And for a man who abhors violence against women, how could you possibly hate someone who has committed no violence against women more than someone who killed several women after torturing them with her husband? Nothing says I abhor violence against women.
Enter James O'Brien, the radio host with a scalpel for words, ready to dissect Jeremy Clarkson's so-called apology like a surgeon removing an infected thought. You know the type, that classic non-apology where someone says sorry but actually doesn't mean it at all. Clarkson's attempt was about as genuine as a £3 note, and O'Brien wasn't having any of it. With surgical precision, he methodically unpacked every insincere word, every carefully crafted phrase designed to look remorseful, while actually deflecting real accountability. It was like watching someone try to put out a fire with gasoline. Clarkson's words were supposed to make things better, but they were just adding more fuel to the controversy. O'Brien, known for his razor-sharp analysis, didn't just critique the apology. He eviscerated it, breaking down how these public figures think they can just throw out a few words and magically make everything okay. Spoiler alert, they can't. And in the world of karma, where actions speak louder than half-hearted statements, Clarkson was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Karma comes calling when loudmouths meet their match. Ever heard of James O'Brien and Jeremy Clarkson? They're like two sides of a coin spinning wildly in the chaotic universe of British media commentary, each with their own gravitational pull of controversy. Clarkson, that loud, brash motoring journalist turned Amazon show host, has always been known for his razor-sharp tongue and absolutely zero filter, while O'Brien represents something entirely different. A radio presenter who cuts through nonsense with surgical precision, armed with logic and a bottomless well of intellectual disdain. You know the type. One guy who loves stirring the pot, and another who loves exposing exactly how ridiculous that pot stirring looks when you shine a spotlight of rational analysis on it. And when it comes to the royal drama, specifically Meghan and Harry's very public split from the British royal establishment, these two figures were about to dance a provocative tango of public opinion that would make karma itself sit up and take notes. When words wound, Clarkson's infamous column of contempt. Jeremy Clarkson's column in The Sun wasn't just a critique, it was a savage, deeply personal attack that crossed every line of decency imaginable. Writing about Meghan Markle, he infamously described a disturbing fantasy of public humiliation, stating he hated her on a cellular level and wanted to see her publicly shamed in a manner so graphic and degrading that it horrified even his most ardent supporters. The visceral nature of his comments went far beyond legitimate criticism, instead revealing a deeply troubling undercurrent of misogynistic vitriol that seemed designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. When the piece was published, it didn't just spark outrage, it ignited a firestorm of condemnation from across the political and media spectrum, with readers, celebrities, and fellow journalists unanimously agreeing that his words were not just offensive, but potentially dangerous in their naked hostility towards a public figure who had already endured relentless media scrutiny. The anatomy of a half-hearted apology, Clarkson's calculated contrition. Ever thrown an apology that's more like a boomerang of insincerity? That's exactly what Jeremy Clarkson did after his infamous column about Meghan Markle. A classic example of the non-apology apology that lands with all the grace of a drunk elephant. His words weren't just a slip. They were a calculated dance of pseudo-remorse, carefully constructed to look like contrition while actually doing nothing to address the real harm. It's the kind of apology that screams, "I'm sorry I got caught," rather than "I'm genuinely sorry for what I did." A performance more rehearsed than genuine, more about damage control than actual accountability. Clarkson's carefully worded statement seemed less about true reflection and more about checking boxes, throwing in just enough performative regret to make it look like he understood the impact of his words, when in reality, he was just trying to minimize the professional fallout. It's the internet equivalent of a teenager's reluctant sorry. Technically an apology, but about as sincere as a used car salesman's warranty. The anatomy of insincerity. O'Brien dismantles Clarkson's performative apology. Just as we've seen the internet's capacity for turning negativity back on its source, James O'Brien emerged as a surgical precision instrument, meticulously dissecting Jeremy Clarkson's so-called apology with the forensic skill of a media commentator who refuses to let performative contrition slide. O'Brien, known for his razor-sharp rhetoric and unflinching moral compass, didn't just critique Clarkson's words. He systematically exposed the hollow mechanics of a pseudo-apology that seemed more designed to manage public perception than demonstrate genuine remorse. With surgical precision, he highlighted how Clarkson's statement was less about accountability and more about damage control, pointing out the fundamental disconnect between expressing regret and truly understanding the harm caused. A hallmark of O'Brien's incisive media analysis that cuts through superficial narratives and demands authentic accountability. Karma, consequences, and the price of unaccountability. Ever thrown a boomerang at someone's reputation? Jeremy Clarkson's definitely learned that lesson the hard way. Remember how we talked about karma's sense of humor? Well, Clarkson's history of inflammatory statements isn't just a collection of random outbursts. It's a carefully curated portfolio of provocative nonsense that's finally catching up with him. His so-called apology to Meghan Markle was about as genuine as a £3 note, more a performative exercise in damage control than actual accountability. When you've spent years building a brand around being deliberately offensive, suddenly claiming you're sorry feels less like genuine remorse and more like a calculated PR move. It's almost like he believes a half-hearted oops can magically erase years of targeted negativity, as if words don't have consequences and the internet doesn't have a memory longer than an elephant's. Clarkson seems to have missed the memo that true accountability isn't about making a noise. It's about listening, understanding, and genuinely reflecting on the impact of your actions. Karma's boomerang when apologies fall flat. In the digital circus of celebrity drama, Meghan and Harry's response to Jeremy Clarkson's half-hearted apology was nothing short of a masterclass in dignified restraint. They'd been through this media rodeo before. Public attacks, sensationalist headlines, the relentless drum of negativity that seems to follow them like an unwelcome shadow. But this time, Clarkson's misogynistic tirade crossed a line that even the most seasoned royal watchers found shocking. Their reaction wasn't about revenge or escalating the conflict. It was a calculated silence that spoke volumes, a quiet reminder that sometimes the most powerful response is to refuse to engage with toxicity. The couple, who had already navigated complex media landscapes and public scrutiny, understood something fundamental. Feeding the beast of controversy only gives it more power. Their measured approach, neither aggressive nor submissive, demonstrated a resilience that has become their trademark, turning what could have been another potential media firestorm into a moment of collective reflection on the dangerous intersection of public shaming, media responsibility, and basic human decency. When words wound, the societal echo of celebrity misconduct. Ever thrown a boomerang of hate? Jeremy Clarkson just did, and the societal ripples are something fierce. His vitriolic comments about Meghan Markle aren't just a personal attack. They're a symptom of a deeper cultural disease, where public figures weaponize their platforms with impunity. When someone with massive media reach decides to publicly shame and degrade a woman, it's not just words. It's a calculated act that reverberates through our collective consciousness, reinforcing toxic narratives about gender, race, and power. Accountability isn't just about a half-hearted apology or a temporary column suspension. It's about recognizing the profound responsibility that comes with having a megaphone in society. Clarkson's words don't exist in a vacuum. They contribute to a landscape where public humiliation is entertainment, where punching down is seen as wit, and where the most vulnerable are perpetually targets. This isn't just about one columnist's moment of rage. It's about the systemic permission we've historically granted to certain voices to wound others without consequence. Karma, media, and the vicious cycle of sensationalism. The media, oh boy, it's like that friend who can't resist stirring the pot at every family gathering. Remember how we talked about karma and how our actions have consequences? Well, the media's got its own boomerang effect going on. Instead of responsibly reporting news, they've turned controversy into a spectator sport, eagerly amplifying every juicy conflict like it's their favorite reality show. It's almost as if sensationalism is their oxygen, and nuanced, compassionate reporting is some rare, endangered species. But here's the kicker. Every inflammatory headline, every clickbait story that reduces human experiences to dramatic sound bites doesn't just affect the people involved. It poisons the entire cultural ecosystem. When media outlets prioritize shock value over genuine understanding, they're not just reporting the story. They're actively creating a narrative that can destroy reputations, fuel negativity, and spread toxicity faster than a viral meme. And just like our keyboard warrior friend Albie, they're playing a dangerous game where the boomerang of karma is always waiting to return. The boomerang of accountability, when apologies fall short. Ever wondered why some apologies feel like empty words tossed into the wind? That's exactly what James O'Brien did with Jeremy Clarkson's so-called apology. He didn't just critique it, he surgically dismantled it piece by painful piece, the way a surgeon might dissect a particularly complex medical case. You see, Clarkson's words weren't just inadequate. They were a masterclass in performative non-accountability, the kind of apology that sounds like it was written by a PR team, trying to minimize damage, rather than genuinely acknowledge harm. It's almost fascinating how someone can string together sentences that sound like an apology, but fundamentally miss the entire point of actually taking responsibility. O'Brien saw right through this linguistic sleight of hand, exposing the hollow, performative nature of Clarkson's statement, breaking down each carefully crafted phrase to reveal the underlying lack of genuine remorse. It's like watching karma unravel a poorly constructed excuse in real time, revealing the naked truth beneath the polished veneer of public statements. Sometimes the most powerful deconstruction isn't about attacking, but simply holding up a mirror and letting the truth speak for itself.